Welcome to A Celtic State of Mind. I'm Paul John Dykes, and today, on Thursday, it's the Bulletin with JP Mason and Declan McConville. How you doing, guys?
All right.
Love the T-shirt deck. Love that T-shirt. That was some campaign. I remember waking up on social media that day, and these T-shirts were popping up everywhere, weren't they? All over the world. It was a great campaign. Great to see that you are sticking with the colour scheme in your bedroom, I've got to say.
Yep.
61 days, JP, bring us up to date. 61 days to the first qualifier in the Champions League. Are you feeling any better this time round than last week?
No. I saw somebody put out that, it was one of the fan accounts put out a thing saying Eddie Howe will be sitting in this seat, and it was the dugout, and it was like on the 22nd of June. I was like, oh no, I've got my days wrong. And I had to double check it. I was like, no. And then I looked at the comments, and somebody said, oh well, he's going to be early then if he's sitting there on the 22nd of June, because there'll be nothing happening at Celtic Park on the 22nd of June. It's 20th of July, 20th or 21st of July is the first Champions League qualifier, and I can only hope that there'll be some of us in the ground on that day.
You would hope so. The big thing as well on a weekly basis, JP, is your shirt over your shoulder changes every week. So you're going for a wee Larson vibe. Was that a replica jersey, match worn?
No, not match worn. No, I just decided because we're off season now, I'm going to until the countdown is expired, I'll put up Celtic-ish related jerseys. I've got loads of football tops from over the years, and I got that when I was living in France in the year 2000. So that's the Euro 2000 top. And for years I had number 10 Larson wrongly on the back, because he was actually number 20 at that tournament, because if you remember, he got called up late to the squad because of his injury. Mm-hmm. So I went and got 10 Larson on the back in this shop in Nice. And then, so for years I didn't have it, but thanks to, and I need to get this right, Football Creatio, there's a guy on Twitter that I found, somebody tagged me, and he does alterations to football strips. So if you've got any tops where your logo, where your sponsors faded, or letters are coming off the back or something like that, he hooks it up, and really reasonably priced. And it's at Football Creatio, Creatio. So Football Shirt Creations and Restorations is his page, and he's a wizard.
See, the thing, JP, in this day and age, everything is now possible. I mean, I found some guy on Facebook, I'm digressing a wee bit here, who does the old, he replenishes your Adidas trainers. You know what I mean? And he brings them back to kind of like life. And so I've got an old pair of original Adidas Predators from 1994.
Is this the ones that you scored against the Teachers then?
Did you see that goal?
No, but Brendan, my friend Brendan has told me Dykes' goal against the Teachers was apparently...
See, it did happen. I didn't make it up. I scored a free kick with the Preds, 1994. Anyway, people are saying, is this not a Celtic podcast, Paul? Get on with it. 5 years ago today, we announced the managerial appointment of one Brendan Rodgers. 5 years ago today. And you look at where we are, you look at where he is, you ask yourself, where did it all go wrong? You ask yourself, can Eddie Howe be the man that comes in and makes that same impact? 5 years, Declan McConville. He gave you, I guess, some of your best times as a Celtic supporter.
Yeah, he did. 5 years ago today exactly, I was sitting in a higher maths classroom in the build-up to prelims, and it was kind of, we were off, and I whizzed away from maths early, says to the teacher, not need to go get an appointment. Sorry if he's listening, by the way. I think he was an Hendry fan, so we're all right. Got a bus to Celtic Park, was looking all about myself as if, what the bloody hell's going on here? Because just these hordes and hordes of people. Went into the main stand, all the pompous and whatnot happened, and we're coming out the ground, and Brian Sharp, if you know Brian, he's a tour guide at Celtic Park, once dubbed as the fifth Beatle due to his very cool haircut. It's not changed in over 5 decades, I don't think. Stopped me in the lounge up the stair when we came out, and we were blah, blah, blah. And we went down to the front door of Celtic Park, and Brian stops to start asking me about exams, and over my right-hand shoulder was Brendan Rodgers waiting to go outside. And I was swiftly told by a Celtic security guard, right, guys, you'll need to go now. So, yeah, decent memories of that day.
Oh, brilliant memories. I mean, I've said to you before, JP, we were at the same gig leading up. Was it a month before? Was it a month before? Steve Mason up at the Liquid Rooms. And, around about that time, the chat was Brendan Rodgers. And I do remember trying to get some kind of access even back then, because back then I was doing a lot of the writing side of things, but you couldn't get anywhere near the club. You couldn't get anywhere near access in Celtic Park. Interesting enough, yesterday there was a brilliant meeting with Celtic, and here I'm going to have to share this one with you guys, right? This is tremendous. So yesterday it was like a fans media meeting, virtual meeting with the club. So they've invited quite a lot of the podcasts and bloggers and who I think if everybody gets on. I don't think there's any static between any of the guys or girls. I don't think so anyway. We don't have an issue with anybody. So we're chatting away about what we can do next season to work in tandem with the club. So press conferences, getting into the stadium to do various things, etc. And it was revealed by the club that Dominic Mackay watches a Celtic State of Mind, and he actually referenced apparently the conversation that Kevin Graham had about where's the biscuit stash. So I knew that they weren't lying. So if you're watching, Dominic, welcome to the show. I hope you're enjoying it. Brendan Rodgers, what was your memory of Brendan coming in and what thereafter ensued, JP?
I think, well, a lot of people didn't think we would actually get him, and in the comments of that post that I tagged you on this morning, somebody said, a big gamble, financially a big gamble. This is like, obviously 5 years ago, somebody's saying that, and that was a Rangers fan, by the way. My ex-flatmate said it was a big gamble, and I replied and said, big club needs a big manager. That was my response. So yeah. It's quite weird to think how that's all panned out since then, but I didn't have any affiliation to the guy because I wasn't, Liverpool minded. I know a lot of Celtic supporters do favour Liverpool, so I think that was probably a big reason why he was welcomed as he was. I just was glad that we were getting him because I knew we were getting a really, really top manager. Didn't think for a second they would go on and have an invincible season and scale the heights that we did. Even I know he didn't do that great in Europe overall, but I mean the Champions League season with Man City, when we drew twice with Man City, and that was unbelievable.
It was. When you think about it, 5 years ago today, and obviously the season that we've just endured, he won us that first treble of the run. That's incredible, isn't it? To even though we've just came out of it, to then consider 4 trebles in a row, unbelievable. But see, when you look at that, right, he left Celtic on the 26th of February 2019, 2 years and 3 months ago. His 6th managerial position has been at Leicester, but he averages 23 months in a job. So he's actually exceeded that slightly at Leicester at the moment. Now, they've won the FA Cup. They're sitting 5th. They could still get into a Champions League spot. Now, the merry-go-round, the managerial merry-go-round has begun down south. Some of the big jobs might be up for grabs. Do you honestly think, JP, that given the opportunity, Brendan Rodgers would leave Leicester for a bigger club down south?
Yes. In a word, yes. I mean, he left the supposed club of his dreams, so he led us to believe, which is why we were singing songs with him for a couple of years. He left us, and I know that there was behind the scenes stuff that was going on between him and the board and whatnot. But his ambition as a manager is there for all to see. I mean, he was in a Leicester suit quicker than the ink had dried in the tabloids. Yeah. So and that's no disrespect to him. I personally don't like it as a Celtic fan as the way that he left, because he left us in a bit of a sticky wicket. But well, to say the least. But he's obviously an ambitious guy, and he's been ruthless, and he's been ruthless with us. He'll be ruthless with Leicester as well. And I would hope their fans are prepared for similar Martin O'Neill tinged heartache at some point in the future.
Absolutely. What about yourself, Declan? You nodded instantly when I said that. Would he leave Leicester? When you see the success that he has had there, firstly, I'm not surprised. I've got to say, I'm not surprised at its success, but I think there is a ceiling where you can take, unless there's an anomaly of a season when Leicester won the league, I think there is a ceiling that most clubs can go to down there, and he's probably reaching that, by getting into the Champions League spots, by winning a domestic trophy. When you look at that success, do you think to yourself, here's what you might have won?
I think it's a bit of a catch-22 situation. When I really enjoyed the FA Cup final on Saturday. He went down there and he's created history for the club. He's worked with a lot of really good talents and players down there. Tillmans, Madison, Vardy's still scoring goals for fun. He's back four, Fofana, Soyuncu. There's a lot of good players that he's working with down there. But I think it's just that in terms of his own ambition of what he wants to achieve and how far he thinks he can take himself. I mean, I'm sure it still lurks him that he never won that Premier League with Liverpool, and he would still probably like to do that. I think a lot of the time it's all about Brendan, just the way he is. And if a more attractive proposition comes up, then I think he would jump ship. But, I think that's just the type of manager he is. And, it's what you're getting whenever you take Brendan Rodgers on.
I think so. 2 years and 3 months down the line, JP, do you think that, I don't think any of us, it's great with hindsight saying that the signs were here, the signs were there, all the various aspects of, even when Brendan Rodgers was at the club, that things weren't going right, the McGinn, everything that we've spoken about. Do you think that he's seen things unravelling? Did he see far too many issues at the club behind the scenes that he realised he couldn't really continue in the role? And if he did see them unravelling, surely he didn't see them to this degree, to these depths in such a short space of time. Just 2 years and 3 months later, we're trophyless when we should be celebrating, or we thought we would be celebrating a historic season.
I don't think he could have foresaw this happening. But then who could have foresaw COVID-19 happening, which I still maintain has had a massive impact on everything, whether it's us falling off a cliff in terms of the football side of things, or just everything really. I mean, I've been sitting here feeling redundant about the fact that I haven't been at a Celtic game for a full season for the first time in my Celtic support in life. I've not been at every. I mean, there'll be people that have been at far more games than I have that will be feeling even more disconnected. But yeah, first time in my life I've not been at a game, and you just feel a bit redundant as a supporter because you've not been able to give that little bit that you can give towards the club, whether it's applauding or just being there at a game or whatever. So I don't think Brendan Rodgers could have predicted this, but I think he, in his head, I think he probably thought, I've left you, like Russell said, I probably thought, I've left you the tools. It's up to you what you do with them, and it's up to you who you sign in terms of the players, because the players that they were starting to sign under him were obviously not his signings, and that was apparent. I'd love to know the nuts and bolts of all of that, because it might make people think a bit differently. I wouldn't say he'll ever be my favourite person in the world after what he did, because it was a shock. But yeah, I never hated the guy, but my ill feeling towards him has subsided over time.
Yeah, I think a lot of fans say that as well, particularly when some of the issues that perhaps were behind the scenes issues have come more to the fore. And I'm going to ask you, Declan, I'm not saying for a moment that Eddie Howe is in the same kind of copy of Brendan Rodgers, but he's obviously studied Brendan Rodgers, his methods. He's worked alongside him as part of his own development as a coach. Is he as close as Celtic can possibly get to someone in the Brendan Rodgers mould at this moment in time?
I would think so. In terms of certainly managers that's worked in the Premier League that are out of work, it's certainly, and he's Eddie Howe English based too. So you're taking somebody that did well to an extent in the Premier League, that played what I thought was really decent attacking football down there. Bournemouth were always a good side to watch in Match of the Day. So Eddie Howe's not maybe reached the heights that Brendan Rodgers hit with that Liverpool team, but certainly in terms of the way he plays football and the way he speaks about the game and the way he understands the game and the way he likes to play football, I think he's certainly a a fit that would do us well. And again, JP was saying earlier on, we got a very decent compensation package for Brendan Rodgers. It was up to the club to spend that compensation package, which in reflection, probably a lot of people would say that the club never did properly.
You're right. We're talking about tools, nuts and bolts, loads of mechanical references there, JP, but the tools got a bit rusty. And obviously, whoever comes in is inheriting a squad that isn't in good shape at the moment, right across the board. A lot of work has to be done. When you look at your Facebook memory that you tagged me in this morning, some of the other names that were being spoken about when Brendan Rodgers was appointed, fill in the blanks, but it was Paul Lambert, Owen Coyle, Davy Moyes and Roy Keane, is that right?
And Malky Mackay.
And Malky Mackay, wow. Mm-hmm. And this time round, Eddie Howe is the only show in town, isn't he?
It seems that way. It was weird just thinking when we were talking about Brendan Rodgers there and just thinking, if he had have won that league with Liverpool, we probably wouldn't have got him. So, I think that's a fair thing to say. Would Celtic have been able to attract a manager who had won the Premier League? Because even if he'd won the Premier League and then lost his job with Liverpool the following season, a la Ranieri at Leicester, would we have had it in us to go and get an English Premier League winning manager? And then you look at the guy who ultimately slipped and fell to cause that, has now come round and managed Rangers to stop 10 titles in a row. It's absolutely bizarre to think that it's all kind of intertwined.
The machinations, and I keep reminding people of this, but when we did, somebody popped up on Twitter today saying that they'd got their hands on the Andy Lynch book that I did with Andy, and I've not looked at that for a long time, but one of the things I found quite amusing, now, at the time it wasn't as relevant, is there's a big story about when Andy was at the forefront of a Liverpool takeover deck. I'm not sure if you've read the book, mate.
I was at the book launch, yeah.
You were there, aye.
Yeah, the first time we met each other.
Is that the one? Just such a young pup back then, Declan. I remember it well. And the thing was with that is he was at the forefront, right? He spearheaded a takeover of Liverpool Football Club, JP, right? 500 million quid. And it was part of a royal family from the UAE. And he was at the forefront of this because he knew Kenny Dalglish and he was the football man. So there's lots of publicity out there at the time where former Celtic captain Andy Lynch says, and he was actually at the forefront. It's an incredible story. I think the chapter's called The $1 Billion Buyers Club or something like that. It's bizarre what actually then ensued. So there were the guests of Liverpool time and time again, and on one occasion Steven Gerrard was injured for a game. So Andy was talking to him in the players' lounge, and Gerrard was talking about his love of Celtic Football Club after talking to Andy about, the fact that he played for Celtic. And he says, I've actually got a Celtic jersey in a frame on my wall with Lynch on the back, but it was Andy's son who had played in the Ronnie Moran testimonial. So there was this big thing about how Stevie was a Celtic fan. And then when he was coming back from LA and people thought, oh, that's a perfect matchup, Gerrard and Rodgers, in fact, a couple of tabloids picked up on this and serialised that part of the book, saying that Stevie Gerrard was signing for Celtic. It just shows you how things have changed, as you say. But yeah, he's a Celtic man at heart. I think that's the real key point of that story. But we're talking about some of the names, some of the big names really who have been in Scottish football over the last few years. Massive names, to attract Brendan Rodgers to Celtic and of course to attract Steven Gerrard to Rangers. There's a comment this morning, I'll ask you about this first of all, Declan, from Chris Sutton in relation to the fact that the goings on, the incident at Peter Lawwell's house, for example, and other issues are going to actually scare away these big names from Scottish football. Do you subscribe to that?
Firstly, on that, I hope that Peter and all his family are okay. I mean, nobody should be subjected to that. People have had different takes on Peter Lawwell this season and the capacity he's worked at Celtic, but nobody deserves that to happen to them. So I hope him and all his family are okay at this time. I think that's something that's kind of maybe been a part of British football. I mean, even in recent weeks, we saw Ed Woodward's house be attacked. So I don't subscribe to this as just a Scottish issue. We've seen it in Manchester. It's something that does go on. It's an underbelly. I hope this isn't a thing that continues. whether or not that would make any difference in Eddie Howe's decision making or anybody else's decision making to come to Scotland, I don't know. But I think if you listen to Brendan Rodgers, again, he had an incident, if you remember right, when he went down to Leicester and his house actually got raided by somebody, was burgled with his wife and daughter in the house. But again, I think for the time he was up here, Brendan spoke very highly of Glasgow. He liked his time in Scotland. I think Steven Gerrard's probably the same. So, no, I don't subscribe to that. I think it's probably something that isn't just a Glasgow issue. It's a British football issue, and it's just something that's unfortunately part and parcel of the game that isn't nice, but hopefully doesn't happen again.
When you look at the situation, JP, and of course we don't know if it's football related, he's obviously a high profile individual, and they're going to link him to Celtic when they're telling the story in the press, etc. But we don't know what the motivation is for the attack, and I echo exactly what Declan said. It's ridiculous to think that someone's been targeted like that, especially when the people were asleep in their beds. 3 generations of the family. Absolutely shocking. You think back to the 80s, not as much the 90s, but mainly the 80s and the hooliganism in British football and across Europe, actually. And then you've had a kind of period where it's not been as prevalent. There has been a resurgence of that type of thing in terms of the terrorist culture re-emerging. There was a theory around the fact that it was a new generation whose dads had been part of the squads and the groups back in the day, and they were just coming of age, and there was another wave of risk fans and all that kind of stuff. But what we've seen during the lockdown period, JP, is a wee bit more concerning. Like Dex said there, storming stadiums, attacking houses, and of course, let's not forget the scenes in George Square at the weekend as well, which would it have made any difference in terms of the era? I don't know. I can't say for sure. But do you think this is, in part due to the cabin fever and the lockdown and the pandemic? And because this behaviour, for me, I can't remember it being as prevalent in my lifetime.
Well, no, neither can I. And somebody doing that, I mean, that's just a maniac. Like, there's no two ways about it. The only person, if somebody could do something like that and then just go into their job the next day, start at 9 o'clock, sit down at their desk and be like, "How was your night last night?" "Aye, okay, great, cool." Aye. I mean, whoever did that is, many, many sandwiches short of a picnic. And, let's hope that they are found and
swiftly,
and jailed, because ultimately you don't want people like that on the loose in Glasgow, because torching a guy's garage. I mean, what? I mean, even somebody standing outside shouting at him in the street is unacceptable, because it's a guy's home. That's a person's sanctuary. You shouldn't mess with that. And to take it to the absolute extreme of doing that, and then obviously the fingers were being pointed at us and other podcasts and things like that. If you're sitting at home and you're taking what somebody says on a podcast to give you the right to go and do something like that, then you're in the same ballpark as Mark Chapman, as far as I'm concerned. For anyone who doesn't know who Mark Chapman is, he shot John Lennon. So it's absolutely insane. And with regards to the fan culture, I mean, I know that there's extremities in European football where you've got fan groups turning up at training grounds and demanding meeting with the captains.
Was that Marseille, wasn't it? Yeah.
But Lazio as well. They're pretty mental for that.
They're mental.
They just turn up and want meetings with the captain and tell the captain how things are going to be in the game at the weekend and everything. And you're just like, aye. And then you've got Aidan McGeady's story as well about when he was playing in Russia and the guys just burst into the dressing room and went up to, I think it was a Brazilian player that had been spotted in a nightclub after they'd been beat off their rivals, and they basically just hurled all their stuff at him. And then McGeady turned to the guy next to him who understood what they'd said in Russian and went, "What did they just say?" And the guy just went, "Oh, put it this way, didn't be going to nightclubs after a game if we've lost, because that guy's getting it if we do." So I mean, things like that's extreme. But I think maybe you've got a point with regards to the lockdown. Maybe people think that they can behave in a certain way, almost in an anarchic way, by doing things like at the weekend was obviously just nuts. And to a lesser extent, I suppose us, go storming the stadium, not storming the stadium, but looking back at that footage, we were compared to the weekend, and I look back at the Ross County footage. There was a couple hundred people there. Do you know what I mean? And it never really got that mental. Like, I know they might like me tonight to make a big point about this shark fence thing. That was like one guy with a herring fence. It wasn't anywhere near what we saw at the weekend. And I don't think that, it was a couple hundred people whose emotions overspilled and they went to the ground. I didn't agree with that happening, and I still don't. But I don't think it deserves to have the headlines attached to it that it did and continues to.
See, the big thing as well, I'm looking at obviously the situation we've all been in, JP, and over the last year on a personal level, it's been very much go to your work, do your work, go home. There's been very little, integration in anything other than that, like most people. But then, being in groups, being in crowds, these are things that you did naturally. There was absolutely no thought process. But it's going to be quite unusual to be in a group like, obviously, a football stadium or a gig. Two things that everybody on this particular show enjoys doing and has missed immeasurably. Declan, will it just be a restart button? We all get back to normal. You walk up the Celtic way, you see the group of guys outside the Pools office doing their thing. You see the various different groups doing what they're doing. Do you think we can just get back to that? Is there going to be a process of getting back into the groove of actually being part of these massive crowds? Because it does concern me a wee bit, I've got to say. I mean, I've probably been as secluded as possible. About the only place I go is to refuel my vehicle, and that's about it, to be honest with you. Totally antisocial for the last year or so, and then all of a sudden you're thrown into maybe going to a gig, and being shoulder to shoulder with thousands of other people, or going to a football game. Can you see it happening gradually, or do you think it will be easy enough for the public to get back to normal in that respect, Declan, getting back to the games?
I think it all just depends. Me and JP just still living under level 3 restrictions, and we can't even leave Glasgow at this point in time. So I think it's going to be a gradual process. Things are looking up to an extent, but there's still chat around different variants of COVID and whatnot. Yesterday it broke news that there were going to be a crowd inside Murrayfield for I think it's the British Lions game or something. So that's something positive. I think it's going to be about 16,000. And last week's meeting, Dominic Mackay seemed quite confident that we were going to get fans back to stadiums. I think it will be gradual. I mean, even from my position, I've sat here for the past year doing university work from home, not been in a lecture hall, not been in uni. So even then, I don't know whether we're going to be put back into a lecture hall, which is going to be a bit weird because I've just been sitting here watching recorded lectures. So I think it might be gradual, but for some things it might just be right back into the way of things. Football, I think maybe just due to the crowd size might take a wee bit longer, but I really, really hope that by the end of this year that we're all back in our seats at Celtic Park and supporting our team, and hopefully that's a successful team under Eddie Howe.
Well, on that note, message coming in from John McFarlane on YouTube. Welcome to the show, John. I still think Eddie Howe will be our new manager. If Brentford beat Bournemouth, I think it will be announced next week. Anyone you speak to who is involved in the mainstream media speaks in the terms that it's a done deal, it's a matter of time, it's contractual in terms of the fact that Celtic can't, unless they want to pay big money to get him out the last wee bit of his deal, which potentially is going to run out on the 1st of June anyway. And there is a chat all around the fact that could be the day of the appointment. But we've heard this week after week after week, JP. It's next Wednesday. No, it's Monday. Get your hair and your spray tan done because it's going to happen on Monday. Not me, by the way. People in the media. When do you think? Because I don't actually think that the events that have been happening over the last few weeks are going to affect any plans that Celtic have in terms of the manager. I also would expect, with the comings and goings that have already started at the club, all the movement that's going to be required during the pre-season, it's going to be impossible to say to somebody, right, you've got 8 weeks to do this, or 6 weeks. It would be 61 days. You've not got a great lengthy time to actually turn this round. It would be 2 months. So I think that he's already doing that and he's already being an influence, but you can't announce him because he's under contract elsewhere. Do you think it's as simple as that?
Surely to God, if he is and has agreed to take the job, as we were told, God, what, over a month ago, was it, that they said that he'd met Dermot Desmond Peterlaw in London?
Yeah.
Is that not right? And it said he's agreed in principle to take the job at Celtic. So if that was an agreement made, then you'd think that he'd be doing things behind the scenes and moving chess pieces around rather than just sitting going, right, well, I can't do anything until it's green for go. Again, just weird seeing that comment come up there and how things influence each other in football. But we're now not hoping, but I mean, I'm not really too fussed about whether Bournemouth go up or not. But we're now looking at Brentford, who've got Ivan Toney up front. So we're wanting Ivan Toney to do the damage against Bournemouth so that we can get Eddie Howe in earlier.
Yeah.
A player that we had in the building to sign. Like, how mental a world is it when that sort of thing happens, But, yeah.
That's the thing about Toney. I mean, this kind of ties into what Patrick Murphy says as well. I've often wondered, why would a Celtic board not give the manager everything they want, from backroom staff to the transfer budget? We can't overspend, but we lost Brendan Rodgers through our lack of ambition. And it kind of leads into what you've just said there. It was quite clear that Toney was a player that Neil Lennon wanted in. The deal wasn't done, and we've gone and signed Albian Ajeti. And it makes me remember some of the other guys who have been in the building, JP, off the top of my head. We've had, dare I say, Nacho Novo in the building. There are images of going in for signing talks. Dwight York was in the building, and we allowed him, whoever it was he signed for, we allowed him to phone the club from our boardroom, apparently, for the discussion over the telephone. That was in Martin O'Neill's time. And there's been loads of others. Of course, David Ginola, we spoke about it last week. There was the meeting with Tommy Burns. Willie Hawkey was at the meeting, and then Fergus McCann comes in and starts talking about the training park at Barrowfield. And Tommy Burns is thinking to himself, oh, please. And Ginola asked to see the training pitch, and that was it. Deal off.
Was De La Pena not one as well?
Yeah, I remember De La Pena and Danny.
Aye.
They played a few trial games. He went on to continue to have success after that trial. We didn't say, but Martin O'Neill liked to give out trials, remember? He offered Rivaldo the trial as well. And that didn't happen.
That's good,
but oh dear. But I mean, these are the things that it brings to mind, but Toney being one of the most recent and hardest ones actually to take, because you look at his value now. But there's the other argument, Declan, I don't know what you think about this, where people are saying, well, even if he was part of this season, it wouldn't have made any difference.
I don't know. I mean, I think if you look at that transfer on paper, the money that they were going to spend on a League One player, I think people would have probably, at the time, been a bit, why are you spending that much money on an English League One player? And on paper, Albian Ajeti, former Basel player, played with Moy Elyounoussi, now at West Ham, Swiss international, all right, better deal. But, and some of the games probably would have made a big difference. I don't know, and even the way we bought, I think we bought in the summer to play 3-5-2, and that gets scrapped very early on. After the Julian injury against Ross County, we kind of went back to the old shape. So, and Odsonne Eduard, he still scored 20 odd goals this season. So, where would Ivan Toney have actually fitted in, apart from probably being a cessation plan to Odsonne Eduard? So I don't know. In principle, though, on paper, I think we'd have been actually quite disappointed we never opted for Ajeti, but hindsight, as we all know, is a wonderful thing. And I think we'd probably now bite your hand off for Ivan Toney.
It's a wonderful thing, as is succession planning, but it doesn't always happen. Interestingly enough, the club who sold him to Brentford, Peterborough, we have secured an interview with their owner, Dara McAntony. So he will be talking to us over the next week or so, and we'll be putting that out on a Celtic State of Mind as well. He does like Celtic. He says he's a Liverpool fan, but he's got a liking for Celtic, and I'll be talking to him about Celtic's proposed moves into the British arena and a British Super League, JP. So I think that'll be interesting to rack his brains about the old Ivan Toney deal as well. And there's also the question around Dembele's brother, who I think's out of contract at the end of the season as well, who's down there, and others, because the speculation has started, as you would expect. And one of the biggest stories over the last 40 hours or so is the fact that Lewis Ferguson, who I know Colin Watt is very fond of, Lewis Ferguson is looking to move out of Aberdeen. He has tabled a transfer request, and that was on the back of a failed bid by Watford of around £1.2 million for his signature. I look at the likes of Ferguson, and again, it's all about opinions, JP, but I think get him in. I mean, I don't know what Aberdeen are looking for, but I would reckon it's probably double the 1.2 at least. But surely he would be a good addition to the Celtic squad. He's a combative midfield player. Is he a replacement, would you guess, for Scott Brown? Is he the type of player who could come in? And I'm meaning that in terms of his playing style rather than the leadership and the captaincy.
Well, I mean, the bid that was rejected by Aberdeen, it was the classic derisory bid, described as derisory. So yeah, they're obviously looking for more than that. Although Aberdeen have been a little bit unrealistic in their transfer valuations in the past. I think they wanted $8 million for Scott McKenna or something at one point.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, wait a minute. I don't know what he's doing at Nottingham Forest, if he's been doing well or not. I've not kept an eye. I'll go back and investigate that, because I'd quite like to know. But Ferguson, there's absolutely no way that I would, if Ferguson was into coming, and I'm led to believe that he is, not just by his uncle, that if he was into coming to Celtic, it would be absolutely mental for us not to go out and sign him and give him, even if it's 2 seasons, say, to get to a level. And then, if he did, I hate the idea of someone using us as a stepping stone. But I mean, I understand people have careers, and there's no longer this sort of holy grail of going for the 10, quote unquote. So I'm all right if a player wants to come for a couple of seasons, as long as they don't down tools halfway through it, and then we have to have a season where they're not interested or things like that. I mean, if it's all spoken about and Lewis Ferguson comes to Celtic to play his way to England, that's fine. But I'd rather he came to us first. You don't want to have another John McGinn in our hands.
No, you definitely don't. And the other thing as well that I would consider, and I'm going to ask you about this, Dec, is, there's been occasions in the past where Celtic have signed a player, and I'm going to use Scott Allen as an example. Scott Brown, further back, Scott Brown, where Celtic and Rangers are in for a player. And as well as maybe bolstering your own squad, you're also, depleting their potential squad by bringing a player into Celtic. I just think that in a week or two, if we were to see, Lewis Ferguson being paraded around Ibrox, I'd be pretty disappointed in that, because I think he would definitely strengthen that side. So it's a bit of a double whammy for me. I think he would improve the Celtic side, but I certainly don't want to see him signing for Rangers.
No, I don't certainly want to see that, and I think I agree with you, Paul, that it would certainly give us something extra. You would have a midfield diamond, possibly a McGregor, Turnbull, Ferguson, which I think, Scottish core of a midfield that would be decent. I think he would fit the bill. I know people will be put off with his links to, obviously, 2 former Rangers players with his dad and his uncle, but time moves on, football moves on, it's a career, and I think it would be a good fit for us, so I certainly wouldn't be turning my nose up at him. And it's no coincidence that arguably our best player this season, David Turnbull, where did we buy him from? An SPFL team.
Yeah. So
fitted in perfectly. We're still in a COVID situation. To bring in a Scottish-based player that knows the league, that knows what it means, I certainly wouldn't say no.
No, definitely not. Now, Brian Watt comes in via YouTube to say I'm really worried events over the last week could affect Eddie Howe's decision. I've read a lot of this on social media. Don't think you could blame him either. This country is toxic at times. Well, it certainly is, Brian, but thanks for getting involved. And in relation to the boy McKenna, I've just been having a wee look at the Scotland squad there, JP, and I'm guessing that's the McKenna who has been named as part of the squad as well, along with quite a few Celtic additions as well. And, Dykes up front, which was nice. The first 2 goalkeepers, Gordon, Marshall, which brings back completely different memories for goalkeepers, for Celtic fans, that's for sure. But looking at that particular squad and linking it into a question that comes up here, Alan Robertson asks, anyone else want Jack Hendry back? It's something we have discussed. and you know he's made it into the squad. There's going to be a few players I think that you know Celtic might benefit from actually. When you think about, for example, Kieran Tierney, right? So there is this chat around him leaving Arsenal for an astronomical figure. I'm guessing, Declan, there's a sell-on for Kieran Tierney? I would think so. I would think
most
so.
Definitely, yeah.
And then you've got players like Ryan Christie, who I think, you know, the contract situation and the performance of Celtic and him as an individual will have resulted in his transfer value dropping somewhat. If he goes and has a good tournament, if Kieran Tierney has a good tournament, if Jack Hendry has a good tournament, these are things that sometimes even on a secondary basis could benefit Celtic. But what the big question is from Alan, would you have him back, Deck?
I don't know. I mean, he's one of those players that at Dundee I quite liked. I mean, we did sign him along with Scott Bair. I thought, okay, it's decent business. I definitely think he was a Brendan Rodgers buy. So he'd probably seen something in him. He can play with the ball out from out the back. He's been consistent this season in terms of playing games with no real bad injuries. I think at this point in time I probably would take him back if we're not going to buy anybody, but I would like to see him be a bit more ambitious. But again, no, he's probably still got something to prove. That 3-2 game at Ibrox, I thought he was very good. He came on and he defended his penalty box very, very well. And obviously we were on to win that game and it was crucial to us winning a double treble. So, you know, I'm all for second chances, but whether or not Jack Hendry would get that at Celtic is going to be up to whoever's in that dugout.
Yeah, and so many other issues around that as well. Brian goes on to say, I think given his form in Belgium, it would be foolish not to see what he could do under a new manager with some more confidence, which I think he has built up. Interestingly enough, last Wednesday, a memorable guest was in with regards to the Belgian football podcast. He spoke in detail about Jack Hendry, JP, and what he did say, what he revealed is that this option to buy that Ostend have, and apparently it's a £2 million figure, that ends on the 31st of May. So then Hendry could possibly and potentially go and have a good tournament for Scotland, and then, you know, Celtic might be in a bargaining position should they wish to offload him, and they might even get a better fee for Hendry. So many different variables in the situation. But I just think it's a difficult one now for Celtic, isn't it? Because we don't have the manager in the door. So how can he assess a player like Jack Hendry and decide whether or not he comes back from the loan deal?
Well, I mean, I'm sure he could probably phone Brendan Rodgers and ask him why he signed him in the first place, if he's got that relationship with him. But I was always of the opinion that Jack Hendry was unfairly labelled this dud defender. I really, really don't think he's a bad football player or a bad defender. I certainly, you know, wanted him to do well when he went away out on loan. I don't have any personal connections to Jack Hendry, so it's not like, you know, I'm trying to fly his flag for any other reason than I just thought I didn't see enough of him to think that guy's a write-off. So if he wants to come back to Celtic, 100%, I'd want him to come back as well, because, you know, if the player's willing and has an ambition and a fire in him to maybe make a few people eat their words, you know. I mean, there's no better motivation than sort of shoving criticism back in someone's face, because, I mean, he took a lot of it. I mean, he basically became a whipping boy, and people, you know, online as well, it was horrible. Yeah. So the stuff he got online was absolutely ridiculous, you know, like it unwarranted, you know, really unwarranted. So yeah, I'm firmly on that bus.
That's an interesting one, because I do remember Ryan Christie after the Livingston, you remember the 2-0 game where he gets sent off, came off social media altogether because of the flack he was getting. And I remember a few occasions where Jack Hendry bit to the criticism. He got involved in a few spats. But it was an interesting thing yesterday where the Celtic media team said that a lot of guys at the club say they don't pay attention to social media, they black it out and all this kind of stuff. But by all accounts, they know exactly what's getting said, and it does affect them as well, which you would expect, because they're human beings just like everybody else. Now, we have Greyfriars Kirk coming in. He would take Ferguson any day at Celtic. Stephen Smith, on the other hand, if Fergus came, he would be a scapegoat for any failings because of who he is. And interestingly enough, Facebook user doesn't come up with his identity. Thanks for getting involved. One thing to note about Ferguson, that he is tall. Celtic have too many average height and wee guys, so get a bit of height in there. And then Kieran comes in to bring up the name of Nisbet, who I think's done so well. This season he's in a Scottish Cup final, he's going to the Euros. I would expect a step up of some description. I just don't know if that step up is going to be to Celtic. I mean, I know there's been interest, Declan, down south for the likes of Kevin Nisbet. He's done well. He's one of these players that I think still could develop further.
Yeah, obviously I don't know if anybody from a Celtic State of Mind tunes into the Hibs Bulletin that I do quite regularly, but it was the Scottish Cup final build-up, and we were talking to Ryan Porteous, Matt Macy and Martin Boyle, as well as Jack Ross. From the outside looking in, it's a very grounded side. They've all got an ambition to do well, and they certainly know what targets they want to do. I think Martin Boyle scored something like 12 goals, which is unheard of for a right midfielder. And the dynamic duo up front, Boyle, Nisbet and Doige, has proved to be successful this season. First time Hibs have achieved third place in 16 years. The manager's very grounded in terms of what he wanted to achieve at Hibs. But Kevin Nisbet, he's still young. He scored wherever he's been. And it was also interesting the other day, somebody had asked Matt Macy on Josh Doig, could he make the step up? I know he's another player linked with us. And whether they saw any similarities between Kieran Tierney and him. Matt Macy had been at Arsenal before he came up the road to Hibs, and he said he saw a lot of similarities between both players in terms of their work rate, how grounded they are, how much they want to achieve in a game. So maybe he could be another possible buy for the Hoops in the summer.
Seems to be a lot of young talent. JP, I've also heard some Celtic fans saying that we should go for Ryan Gold, the attacking midfielder. Has had an impressive season in Portugal for Farense, or is it Farense? I'm not so sure on Portuguese football, I've got to say. 9 goals, 7 assists and 34 appearances. He's going to be up for a free during the summer as well. His name has been mentioned a few times, and Moravcik's speaking about quite a lot of the young guys in Scottish football at the moment making a name for themselves. Ferguson, Doig, Campbell and Nisbet, all young, hungry, fit players who know the league and are desperate for a few medals. On paper, it looks great to me, JP. I wouldn't say no to any of them on paper, but as Declan alluded to before, it doesn't quite work like that, especially not at Celtic.
Well, with regards to Lewis Ferguson, if Lewis Ferguson wanted to come to Celtic, I have absolutely no issue with that. I mean, if he does end up at Rangers, then it's because he wants to go to Rangers. Simple as that. But if right now Lewis Ferguson is sitting there considering Celtic as an option, then absolutely we should sign him. There's no question. There's so much money's been squandered on players that have gone absolutely nowhere in a Celtic shirt, apart from out the door with very little appearances. So. Lewis Ferguson is a no-brainer for me. I've seen enough of him to think that he can be developed further at Celtic. And Doig as well, I watched his interview to accept the Young Player of the Year. No. What award did they win? There's so many of them.
Was it the Writers? Scottish Writers Young Player?
Scottish Writers Young Player of the Year. And, see, based on that interview and also the little showreel I saw of him, because I don't watch Hibs, I don't see them that much. I've seen them against us and that's it. Didn't really pay attention to him as much. But based on his interview, seems like a really nice guy. Sound, gets it. Just like obviously loves playing football. Not about, show or anything like that. Probably is the type of guy that knows that he has to get, a couple of 100 games under his belt before he can start really saying he's a proper footballer. And you can't have too many of them at your club.
It's good to hear that, because obviously the big criticism a lot of the time is around the attitude of these guys thinking that they're kind of like superstars before they're footballers, rather than the other way about. The famous Tommy Docherty quote, we've got all these superstars who want to be footballers. Back in the day, footballers wanted to be superstars, and it's flipped. So it's great to hear that he is grounded, and obviously had a spell like Andy Robertson at Queen's Park. Quite a lot of footballers have used that as a route, go to Queen's Park, sometimes a sidestep, sometimes a back step. And of course, James Allen played for Queen's Park as well, JP, and I spoke to his guitarist from Las Vegas the other day, Rab. So, tune into that interview as well, because what a lovely fella he is as well, by the way, Rab Allen. I don't know if you've had any dealings with him, JP.
I've known them for a long time, yeah. I saw them support a band at Cabaret Voltaire in Edinburgh called Tiny Dancers, and I reviewed it and sent it. I met Denise, James's sister, that night, and then I sent them the review, and then I've been pretty pally with them ever since. So watched them go from playing to like 20 people to selling out the Barrowland and whatnot. So and obviously James is a massive Celtic fan. He's got a cracking black Tommy Burns t-shirt that he got from the Barrowland market, and I'm pretty sure it's the picture of Tommy Burns on his knees. He's got that, but yeah, they've got a Rangers fan in their midst. Paul, the bass player, he's a Rangers fan, but we'll not hold that against him.
No, I've not interviewed him, interestingly. But you never know. Yeah, very interesting interview. I'm a big fan, have been for a while. But as well as bringing players in, we've got to look at some of the guys that will be leaving the club. And we watched with interest the final performance against Hibs, and I use performance, the word, pretty lightly when I speak about Odds and Eduard. Such a disappointing season across the board for Celtic. But I think that it'll be best for him, certainly, to move on. I think the time is right. It would have been great if he was moving on to a fanfare and celebrating 10 in a row, etc. But I've seen a figure of 20 million kind of being reported, Declan, and I know that in the past we've looked at higher fees for the likes of Odds and Eduard. Do you think that's a realistic figure for Eduard if he was to move on?
It's probably realistic and a wee bit over what I'm expecting to get from him. I just think, with how long he's getting his contract, that's probably going to be the thing that stops us demanding a higher fee. So I think anything between 15 and 20 million will probably be out the door if the player certainly wants to leave the club and, his mind's already made up. I think that's a decent way to cash in, and, all the best to him, because he's been a real class act for Celtic. He's brought a lot of special goals and special times to the club, but if the player's made his mind up, then, £20 million, I'd be delighted at that, as long as it gets properly invested back into the squad. But I'm probably more in the camp that I think we'll be closer to 15 than 20.
It's frustrating, going back, JP, to something Declan said before about succession planning. You get a massive fee for the likes of Brendan Rodgers, but you don't make that next step ahead when it comes to the managerial appointment. You felt that when we had Dembele and then you bring in Eduard, there's the succession plan right there. I would have loved to have seen the two of them flourish together. Absolutely would have. But I just don't see, we don't have the next step. If Eduard goes, I don't even think we've got our first pick. We know the situation with Lee Griffiths. We don't even know if he's going to be here next season. Bayo's out on loan. Klamala's gone. Ayeti hasn't kicked on. We might cut our losses on him. There's been no succession planning here. And I think that when you look at Eduard, if we were to get 20, and that's maybe the top kind of end deck, as you say, that's maybe the top end of the scale, 20 million quid. I mean, what are you spending to bring in the successor to Odds and Eduard? Because, we spent 9 million quid on him, and players like him, that kind of talent, are few and far between.
Well, remember, we only spent about $500,000 on Moussa Dembele, so there's sure there's players out there that can be found. The Dembele thing is, I just can't believe he's going to go, just like Scott Brown going with an empty stadium. And I know it's off the back of a horrendous season where we've not done anywhere near what we could have and should have done, but just Eduard leaving kind of meekly, just like, all right, see you later, mate. Thanks for the memories. Maybe a social media post or whatever, and it's just like that's brutal, because at one point, only a year ago, the whole of Celtic Park would have been absolutely bouncing to "I want to be Eduard," and not many players get that. Get that, like a full stadium rocking to a song. You've got to have something pretty special about you to get a full stadium giving it "Yeehaw" to a song. Scott Sinclair obviously being one of them, but with regards to the money getting back for Eduard, obviously we spent I've always been led to believe that it was the deal that was worth 9 million. I don't think we actually shelled out 9 million quid for Eduard. I think it was all built up to 9 potentially. So we'll obviously, if we have ended up spending 9 over the course of his time here, with add-ons, international appearances, goals, etc., then you're obviously looking to recoup that 9 million for a start and then make a profit on it. So if you're only making 6 million on Eduard, based on what he's done and what he continues to do, albeit at under 21 level internationally, but I mean, we don't want to get shortchanged here, because I'm not buying into the narrative that just because he's had, and he's not even, he's had a poor season, I suppose, playing standards, but he's still, highest, is it the highest goal scoring season that he's had?
It would be actually, 22, I think, was the final total.
Yeah,
so, I don't know if I'm counting his Scottish Cup final goal from the previous season in that.
Yeah, but I mean, it's I'm not buying into the fact that, he's suddenly a dud or anything crazy like that. I mean, he is definitely not a dud. Wherever he goes next, I'm absolutely certain that he'll get to a really great level again, and will probably go on to an even bigger club than potentially where he goes to next. I think he's too good.
From what I've seen, JP, I think, certainly when you look at what Dembele's done since he left Celtic, Odsonne Eduard could do likewise. I don't think that there's much. They're different types of players, granted, but I don't think there's much separating them, to be honest. And when I'm looking at Eduard, and I know it's difficult when things are so frustrating, like the season we've just had, and Celtic supporters are feeling really frustrated by what's happening at the club, and you can have a go at this player and that, but if we're going to be completely honest and totally balanced about it, you've also got to say, well, you know what? He's carried that front line for the best part of 2 seasons. I mean, there was some kind of like respite when Lee Griffiths came in for the second part of the season, and then the season was cut short, of course. But up to that point, it was almost like he was dead on his legs at times, if you remember back. And then this season, I felt like that as well. A lot of games I watched, and he was very, very active, even coming back and doing a lot of kind of like defensive work and winning the ball in his own half in the first 15, 20 minutes of a game. And then it gradually kind of ground down to the point where he looks languid, he looks like he's not interested. But he's been carrying that side all season. I mean, he's had no backup in terms of a partner up front. He's not been able to be rested at any point. And of course, he had COVID. So, we look at it and we think he's had a poor season. But there has been other circumstances around that as well, JP, if I'm trying to be as fair as possible on Eddie.
I think mentally just you pointing that out there, mentally for a guy that young, he's like, 22? And like he's basically carrying the expectations and weight of a huge Celtic fan base on his shoulders with very little help, he got the help in January to March last year from Lee Griffiths when he came back. Just on Lee Griffiths as well, I know everybody can will be like, oh, well, he's not in the Scotland squad, it's his own fault, blah, blah, blah. I don't know if it was entirely all Lee Griffiths' fault. I don't think you can put the whole blame at Lee Griffiths' door. We don't know the ins and outs, and we might not know until a book in 10 years' time or something like that. But I've got a degree of sympathy for Lee Griffiths, because it's probably a once in a lifetime chance to get in a Scotland squad for it. I mean, given that we haven't been there since France '98, I was in first year at uni. So these things don't come along. I mean, hopefully, with that sort of squad and the youth of the squad, you'd like to think that it might be the start of something now, that we can now get there regularly, rather than just like once every 20 years or whatever. But I do feel a bit for Lee Griffiths. People will be going nuts, going, oh, nah, who cares about him? He's a waste of space. He's not fit. He's not this or he's not that. But he came in. He was playing. He was fit. He was available to play on the bench and things like that. But then you look at the difference. James Forrest just comes flying back in, plays 9-10 games, and then gets in the squad. So but Steve Clarke obviously doesn't have an issue with Lee Griffiths, because he was in the last squad, wasn't he? Was he not in he scored one of the penalties in the penalty shootout. Yeah. He scored the first penalty in the penalty shootout. So
the pressure one, absolutely. Yeah. You brought back a wee memory here in relation to the talent that undoubtedly is possessed by Lee Griffiths and in a finals tournament. I remember reading a George Best book, can't remember which one, I've read a few over the years, but there was a moment in his career, right, in 1982, and Bobby Murdoch was the manager of Middlesbrough, and Bertie Peacock was the assistant manager at Northern Ireland. Interesting how these things work out, because at the end of Bertie Peacock's Celtic career, Bobby Murdoch was just starting a fledgling career at Celtic. And there was a plan to take, believe it or not, there was a plan to take George Best to the 1982 World Cup. And at that time, he was between clubs. He had just finished in the 81 for San Jose Earthquakes, and he was between clubs. So Bertie Peacock had this idea that he would get onto Bobby Murdoch, who was the manager of Middlesbrough. And he says to Bobby that, could you sign George Best? He'll talk to you. Can you sign him, get him fit, and I'll take him to the World Cup. Right? And I think Middlesbrough might have been fighting relegation at the time, so Bobby Murdoch was right up for this, you know, and they had discussions about it, but it came down to, and I don't know which Miss World he was with at that time, but his partner didn't want to move to Middlesbrough for that period of time to get him fit before they went to World Cup.
The old Ginola move.
This is it. This is it. And I just remember thinking to myself how sad it was that, you know, George Best didn't grace a World Cup finals tournament at some point in his life, even though he would have been, I think, and you need to check this, he would have been the wrong side of 35 by that point, well past his best, but there was this thought process in the Northern Ireland camp that he could spark something into life, even if used for 15 minutes. And I think, and I'm not comparing George Best to Lee Griffiths, I think when you look at some of the experience or lack of in and around that kind of area of the squad, JP, that would have been the reason why I would have thrown Lee Griffiths in there. Yeah, we know he's not had a lot of football this season, but, you know, for that 10, 15 minutes, you just never know if you could throw him on, that he could make something happen. And that's my biggest disappointment for him.
Totally. If you like, whether you like the guy or not, you know, as you said the other day, he's, you know, the best striker that Scotland have, but it's other factors that seem to have clouded that. You know, I mean, even your most hardened Rangers fan could surely appreciate the fact that he can score goals. He scored a good few against them. You know, that one at Ibrox where he whipped it into the top bin was brilliant. You know, and you know, his free kicks against England, they didn't happen. They didn't happen. You know, when he was an 18-year-old. You know, they happened a few years ago. You know, so I would have as well. But I mean, I'm not Steve Clarke and I'm not an international manager. So hopefully, whatever squad he's chosen will do the business.
And you never know, because he's basically said, for those left behind, keep yourself fit. You never know. Oh, yeah. You might get a call up, you know. Yeah. So tomorrow, it's been 18 years since Seville, a European final. 5 years ago today, Brendan Rodgers was announced as the Celtic manager. And today we are talking about 61 days to our first fixture and several months since Neil Lennon left the building. Thank you everybody for getting involved in the chat on YouTube, Facebook and also on Twitter, and thank you to Declan McConville and JP Mason for joining me once again on A Celtic State of Mind.